Good afternoon, and sorry for the delay there. We were having a little bit of technical issues, and we worked on it. So you're going to see a little bit of a modified view of the slides today, but don't worry, we will be sending out the slides after today's presentation. Welcome to the latest in our series of ENO, Center for Transportation webinars. My name is Brianne Eby. I'm a policy analyst here at ENO. Today we present Achieving Resilient Mobility Systems, Challenges and Opportunities. Cities and their transport systems face a growing number of adversities and challenges. Two examples of such challenges are the increase in extreme weather events due to climate change and increased capacity needs due to growing migrant populations. Decision makers often talk about resilience when facing shocks that are expected and unexpected, but what exactly does it mean to achieve resilience, and how is the idea related to transportation? 100 Resilient Cities is a Rockefeller Foundation initiative that defines urban resilience as the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. Here today to explore this concept, how this concept translates to urban mobility systems, and to explain a bit more about 100 Resilient Cities' work on urban resilience is Andrew Salkin, Senior Vice President of City Solutions. After Andrew's presentation, we'll have plenty of time for questions. For those listening in, you are encouraged to submit questions and comments through the questions function on the webinar website. You don't have to wait until Andrew is done to submit questions. You can submit at any time. Thank you all again for taking the time to join us today. And with that, take it away, Andrew.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. And it's nice to be here today sharing some thoughts on resilience, urban resilience with everyone. Joined by Marianne Jiang, who's been working specifically on transportation issues related to 100 Resilient Cities. And if I can get through the part of the deck quickly, she'll jump in and get into some of the transportation specific thinking. What we thought today that we would do real quick is, let's move these slides forward, is just let you know real quickly what 100 Resilient Cities is, how we're thinking about resilience and the different ways that we're talking to the cities we're working with and defining that work and leveraging the thinking, and then get into a little bit around the state of the thinking on resilience and transportation and how the issues are emerging with our cities, and offer some challenges and opportunities for all of us to be thinking about as our work progresses. So let's just jump into that. So real quick, 100 Resilient Cities is a 5-year-old organization. We were founded by the Rockefeller Foundation with the idea of working with cities very explicitly on this concept of resilience. The idea is that cities are going to be places where most of the world lives. We know more than 50% of the world lives there now, and it's estimated to be over 70% by 2050. But what's more remarkable about that information is that 65% of where those folks are going to live has yet to be built yet, and much more of that space is going to be rebuilt between now and that time. So we have a tremendous opportunity to influence how cities actually are, function, and how the people that live there experience the city itself and their everyday life. And the thought is resilience can be a way of helping cities think about the work, understand the different complex systems that they are a part of, and begin to not only plan for who they are in a better way, but also plan for who they're going to be in a more robust and specific way. So to help cities do that, 100 Resilient Cities gives each city funding to hire a chief resilience officer, which is designed to be a new position working closely with the mayor and other city leaders, who is charged with working not only with the city leaders and across silos of government, but also outside government, explicitly with the civic sector and the private sector. We partner with the Chief Resilience Officer and the city leaders to create a resilience strategy where we provide resources for the city to create a really definitive point of view about who the city is today and who they really want to become tomorrow, with a clear vision and goals that are oriented towards the generational, so they can begin to manage their daily or monthly or annual budgets and election cycles with a slightly more prolonged look, with the hope that the cities can be much more transformative in their investments and get beyond the day-to-day political pieces. Today, we have 100 cities in our program. There's about 80 chief resilience officers, and we have just under 50 strategies released. And our hope is by this time next year that we're kind of over the 90 mark there. Obviously, working with cities can be complicated as you have transitions in and out of city leadership and political turmoil that happens just in the normal course of city business, which makes having 100 kind of fun. Someone's always in crisis and someone's always eager for taking the next step. We also connect these cities together in a global network, not just the chief resilience officers, but all the staff who's working on this. We have over 300 people beyond the chief resilience officer who have been assigned to working on resilience full time, as well as the departments that are partnering with the chief resilience officer and the staff beyond the city that's also been assigned to do this work. So we're creating this very robust network that expands beyond these single nodes. And then we connect folks to private sector, so institutions like yourself who are doing work on specific topics and becoming institutional leaders, as well as strong private sector partners who have resources that perhaps can help cities. We have connecting cities to these partners to help not just in the thinking of what's happening and what the art of possible is, but also providing these free resources to cities around frameworks, understanding how to measure data, partnerships in collecting information, and best kind of helping cities get over some of the thinking that they have and start turning the thinking into action. We have 120 partners now offering a wide array of services. So this is what 100RC started as, and what we've tried to do is help cities as they do the work begin to embrace resilience and really begin to embed it into their business. So when we think about resilience, you heard the definition. It's very broad. It's the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, but it's really looking at those different systems. And what we want cities to do is not only ask themselves, how do we survive and how do we adapt, but really how do we act proactively so that no matter what we face, whether it's a stress or a shock, that we're actually prepared to grow and leverage this opportunity to emerge in a better place than we are today, or a better place than we would have been if we hadn't done the right type of thinking. To help cities do this work, we really push them to think about acute shocks, which I think are things that a lot of us focus on. And we, in the beginning, hit a couple of them, from climate change to, changing demographics, which is a little bit more of a stress, I guess. But we think shocks are places that people begin to focus on and they can get all the attention. But what we find is that when you're working with cities, that we really want them to understand the concept of stresses, because if you think about it in many ways, cities are the owners of the stresses. And if you just changed every department in the city to be the owner of a stress, the Department of Water Scarcity or Water Delivery is a stress management agency, providing economic opportunity, providing access to mobility, whether it's the Department of Transportation, who owns the stress of aging infrastructure. These are all important components of how the city does its work and can maintain its important essential functions as it does its day-to-day business. And what we believe is that shocks are one thing, but the stresses are where your day-to-day budgets, energies, and resources are being spent. If you're not really understanding how your shocks are playing into how your city's functioning today, you're missing tremendous opportunities. So we work very explicitly with cities to elevate not only the threat of shocks, but really bringing those stresses as a key component of how they do the work. To do this work, we have a resilience framework that we've shared with all our cities, and this is something that the Rockefeller Foundation worked on with Arab ID to create. And what this does is it really begins to break the city systems down into 4 key categories. And in my mind, they really break down between people, which is health and well-being, economy and society, place, which is really focused on the infrastructure and environment, and then the city's knowledge, which is broken down into the leadership and the strategy of the city. And what we want cities to do is begin to think about the different activities that are going on and the different things that they're trying to deliver in each one of these boxes. So whether it's around basic needs and really working with cities to challenge themselves on, are you delivering housing, water, energy in effective, efficient ways that are affordable for your citizens. So saying to cities, if you do that better, you'll be a more resilient city. But at the same time, thinking about how you're meeting basic needs plays into how you foster economic prosperity and the role that government plays in being a good partner to fostering economic prosperity, as well as a partner in working to ensure that the city's policies and leadership is working towards building strong, robust communities. And the way they do that by leveraging the place and the space. So I'm not going to get into the details of this work, but we can certainly send out a link along with the presentation that can give you the details of the framework's creation and where it came from. But what we have found with this framework is that by getting cities to focus on these different components of of how their city is impacted, it begins to answer some questions to themselves about how they begin to kind of frame up resilience. And the idea is to really get people on the inside of the circle, because once you're there, you start to see the different connections between the multiple components and really know that there's a link between people and place, leadership and society, and that you have to solve for all of these problems at the same time. To help give some folks guidance for that, the framework goes into a little deeper into not just kind of these larger drivers of resilience, but also talks about the qualities that you need to be able to bring. And what we really want is cities to be thinking about these 7 qualities as they get into the work they do. And so for us, when we think about transportation and access to opportunity, it's important to learn from what you've had in the past, to say that what we've learned in the past is going to be what we leverage for the future, but by no means do we know what the future holds. And really begin to challenge the resources that have been put in place that really says, are we creating something that's robust in the right way? Are we leveraging the resources we have in a way that's flexible, that will allow us to achieve the same outcomes through different methodologies? Are we being integrated and purposeful in how our work is being done? Are we making sure that our limited investments are being leveraged to include the greatest benefit possible? Are we creating resources that have permission to be used in different ways, or can be used in different ways? And are we updating those resources and the use of resources in a really interesting way? And I think this in particular comes down to when you think about the empty space, the open space between buildings, and how that's been used the same way for multiple years is now getting challenged by technology and other uses on the street for purposes that are non-traditional or not even contemplated by governments as they're created. So it's an interesting place to think about. But if cities had true sense of what they were trying to do, I think they'd be able to manage that space in a more resilient way. And finally, thinking about redundancy and ensuring that you have the right capacity and you're leveraging the backup capacity in a way that's smart and affordable and not just done for the sake of doing. And that first, and then in many ways, among all others, that you're being inclusive and that you're deliberately seeking the point of views of different sectors and different individuals in your community, and that you understand their point of view, so that it's not that I'm building a BRT for the sake of you because you need a BRT, but I'm actually building you the transportation system that you demand and need, so that you can be a important contributor to society and have that job that you want. So if you put it all together, one way to think about it in a little chart is this notion that the blue line here, dotted blue line, represents the city's trajectory, but something's inevitably going to happen, and that's that shock or stress that brings the city down. And then you see the black line that could represent a situation where a city actually doesn't get back to its old trajectory before the next shock happens. We saw this happen in LA recently, where you're in severe drought, and then the severe drought leads to forest fires, and then the forest fires ruin the capacity of the natural ecosystem to process water, and then you had big storms. The big storms led to landslides, and landslides led to a whole series of things. So you can see a cascading effect of events that came out of one place. But what we want cities to begin to do is think about the fact that because something's going to happen, how do you begin to make those investments today in a way that when that something happens, that it has less of an impact, or even more importantly, that because you're making an investment today, you actually transform who your city is and how it functions, and that your exposure to a risk may be limited in the future, but maybe the city as a whole is better, with the hope that you never actually have an exposure to a particular bad thing down the road, and your city is just better anyway. That is a quick summary. And what Marianne has done, and I think we have a little bit of time, right, Marianne?
Yeah.
Is Marianne's going to talk a little bit about how she's been thinking about the mobility challenge and resilience, and how cities have been kind of grappling with that.
Yeah. So thanks, Andrew. So I'm Marianne, as Andrew said, and basically I've been doing a little bit of research over the last few weeks, trying to get a grip on sort of what's going on in the transport sector, and how you all and we all are thinking about resilience in the sector as it is now. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of the ongoing research. It's by no means complete, and if you have any comments or feedback, we'd be grateful for it. So Yeah, please keep that in mind as you see the next few slides. So currently, what we're thinking when it comes to resilience and mobility is, we're thinking about mobility in the broadest sense that it's all modes, and I think traditionally walking and cycling might not be considered a mode of mobility, but we'd like to encompass all of that. So our current working definition is that we're thinking of sort of resilient mobility as a capacity for people or goods to get from A to B seamlessly with a choice of modes in a way that will contribute to, obviously link back to our definition of resilience, contribute to an individual, community, or city's ability to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of shocks and stresses. And here's just sort of a snapshot of the interconnected issues that Andrew was talking about when thinking about resilience. That the benefit of a resilient mobility system is that there's increased access to jobs, there's increased access for vulnerable populations, which supports the increased access to jobs. Hopefully there'll be a reduction in the risk of failure in the event of a disaster, and coupled with that is also the ability of a good transport system to communicate clearly and dynamically with its travelers. So in the research that I've done to date so far, what it seems to me is that there is resilience thinking in the transport sector, and it's siloed in these three ways. So the one is there's a lot of thinking around existing transport infrastructure resilience, with certain, with earthquakes, recent hurricanes and storms. There's been a lot of focus on things like flooded subway stations, and landslides blocking roads. And there's definitely a lot of focus now globally around focusing on on strengthening and hardening our existing transport infrastructure. So that's one silo. The next silo is one that I think receives a little less attention around the world. It gets a little bit more attention, I think, here in the U.S. and in Europe, but it's sort of investing in new transport infrastructure and thinking about incorporating resilience and climate science, but also thinking about delivering broader benefits through new infrastructure investments. And so I have a couple of examples of things that our cities are working on in this sort of area. And then the third one, I don't know if everyone would consider it sort of a resilience work, but it's sort of it's around systems level resilience and thinking about how we improve our transport systems today. As we know, there's just a lot of disruption in the sector. There's a lot of new technologies. There's new ways to collect data and analyze data. And I think all departments of transport around the world are grappling with sort of how to harness this, these new technologies and make the most of them in a way to maximize the efficiency of the assets that you do have, but then also, also trying to harness them in a way where they can deliver the most public good and so that they're not just totally disruptive and advantaging one part of the population. So I won't go through these slides because I basically said them all, but I think what we're thinking at 100RC is that there is a way to think about all three in a more comprehensive way, and we will be putting out sort of a paper, I think, soon that outlines that. So please keep your eyes out on our website. But in short, it's just I think we're thinking that there are ways that projects can be more integrated, that agencies can be more integrated, and that there's a bit of a paradigm shift that could happen in the transport sector.
Right, and we think if all that kind of if a city is motivated and has a strong point of view about the opportunity of their transport network can play in the different challenges that they have as a city or their pathway to resilience, they will necessarily begin to ask, how can the current investments I'm making today in transportation be leveraged to help achieve other goals that we have for our city's resilience, while at the same time they might be asking questions about how do I make investments in current things that aren't related to transportation that could be done in a way that help us leverage increased resilience in our transportation system. And we're trying to get cities to ask those questions both ways and simultaneously, and try to do it in a way that says something's going to happen, so that red shock is going to happen, which now is turned into gray. And the idea is when that happens, what have you done to better not only prepare yourself, but how have you evolved your city systems already so that your city is a completely different place by the time something, a shock rears its ugly head or a stress finally catches up with you, and that you've been proactively managing them or for them over multiple years. We could end here if we want to open for questions, or do you want to?
Yeah, Brianne, I don't know if do we have more time, a couple more minutes to go through some case studies, or we can just take questions?
Yeah. Go ahead and do maybe one quick case study if you can.
Okay, great. So we'll do the case study of Thessaloniki. That's the one I know the best. So the city of Thessaloniki, they recently approached us because they had this conundrum. They are opening. There's been a subway under construction for the last 14 years due to. It's very interesting, but basically due to all the archaeological findings they keep finding every time they dig. Anyway, their first station is opening next year, and our chief resilience officer in Thessaloniki called us and he said, we have this problem. There's a metro system that's going in. It's been decided by national government, and it's being funded by sort of EU regional funds, and the city has had no say about where this line goes, and so the city sort of gave up on it. But he said recently what we realized is that this is a huge investment that's going in our city, and nobody's thinking about how to leverage it. And the thing is, the city just didn't know where to start because there was no clear, there's no clear owner for what this project would even be. So we came in and we did a workshop with many local stakeholders, and the chief resilience officer was instrumental in making sure all the right people were in the room, from different city departments to academics to business associations that were represented along this one corridor, Egnatia Street, where the subway is being built, to residents associations, and he sort of made sure everybody was in the room. And we brought in some sort of external international subject matter experts who've worked in other cities on similar topics, and we basically came up with a really good set of recommendations for what the city could do moving forward, how to leverage the fact that there is this huge metro investment going in, and how the city could basically think about leveraging the land around it, how to build in sort of economic development, how to think about repurposing the buildings, improving the street furniture, and sort of what pilots they could run, smart city pilots they could run.
Yeah, and what makes this project really exciting for us is, the city's strategy itself outlined the need to leverage mobility in a more robust way. They were more concerned about cars being in the way, and they didn't realize that they had this amazing asset that was about to come online. They wanted to understand how they could leverage the new economy or grow their economy in a way that is appropriate for Thessaloniki and the Greek economy at the time. And again, nothing's better for that than new transit investments, especially if someone else paid for it. But they wanted to also think about how they improve the public realm and space, not just around transit, but throughout the city, and begin to transform their city. And then they also are asking questions around their natural systems and how those systems can be enhanced through different investments the city can make. So this one project gave them a lens into all those components that they've already identified were critical for them improving their resilience. And what we were able to do is bring the kind of people-centered component around that, as well as the city-level, almost metro-level goals of a better economy and a more robust transit system as an anchor to drive those changes. So that's what we're trying to get folks to do. And then the hope is that having a broad set of stakeholders excited about the work, it will actually progress the work and put some pressure on the work to happen, as opposed to just be talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we can wrap up there for now, and happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew and Mary Ann. We have had a couple of questions come in already, but feel free, listeners, to keep submitting those, and we'll probably try to bunch them together here to streamline and get in as much as we can in the couple of minutes we have left. So I recognize that your work is international, but there's a couple of questions here about the Trump administration here in the U.S., which unveiled its $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan this winter. Can you speak to the plan's significance for resilience efforts? And then maybe let's lump that in with, if you can speak at all to the interplay between federal, state, and then local governments here in the U.S. In their efforts to dealing with resilience.
Sure, and it's a really critical question is is one, what's the current infrastructure state of transportation, and two, what's the future and what do you need it to do and how does it move forward? So what we're trying to do is, one, just get cities to have a strong point of view about what they need their transportation system to do, and then understand the resources and assets they have that they can leverage to do that work. Often they're at the whim and at the mercy of the relationship with the states, and unfortunately the relationship with the federal government, which is typically decreasing the funds. But one of the things that we do know is that whatever happens, and this is one of the reasons we pick cities, is whatever happens to a metropolitan region, it's typically the mayors that are held accountable and held responsible for this work. And what we want the cities to do is begin to leverage that point of view they have, which is saying, this is what we need our transportation system to do, and here's how we're going to leverage this, to put the pressure on the partnership that they can create through the levers they have, whether it's through their different bully pulpit, to taxing, to leveraging city investments, to leveraging city budget, to really drive the direction of where they want the city to go. And I think it's never been harder for cities and folks who are big managers of transportation systems to manage the assets that they own. But I think this is going to call for greater partnership. And I think what our hope is as the Trump administration starts thinking about creating frameworks that allow for better private-public partnerships, that we're helping the cities in our network are helping other cities, who are beyond the network, really think about the different funding mechanisms that are available, whether it's city-driven or city leverage, that really drive the private sector to deliver the outcomes that are needed. And I think it depends on what level of transportation you're talking about, but I think there's really untapped resources there, but are limited under the way that we currently implement solutions.
Wondering if there are any U.S. City efforts that you can think of that are, particularly compelling in this case. It sounds like there's our resilience efforts by both the Transportation Research Board as well as AASHTO. Any U.S. examples you can speak to?
U.S. examples of cities, you mean?
Sure, yeah.
Who are doing sort of best practice work in thinking about resilience?
Transportation resilience, yeah.
Yeah. There are definitely cities who are, I think who are making really good strides. First of all, I should say that in terms of transport, we're currently not doing a lot with U.S. cities. I think we had at one point hoped to work closely with Nashville, but that is no longer. So we aren't currently doing a lot with U.S. cities, I have to say.
I think Marianne, taking a slightly different perspective of the question is what we're trying to say to cities is you are going to make transportation investments in your community, and that's a fact. Whether it's going to be money spent on fixing up the old system to make it work, whatever budget you have to keep it sustaining, or new investments to make it do something different. And what we're saying is, whatever that money is, you have a very limited amount. You probably don't have enough to fully get what you want. So make sure that investment is being leveraged in the greatest way possible. And so that you want to ensure that if you're going to be investing in level of service and ensuring that the system can continue to function, that if you're going to use those dollars, where do you invest those dollars first? And you should have a very clear conscience about where you're putting that money, and that you want to focus on the communities that you'll get the greatest resilient benefit for that investment possible, and that you're not continuing to support the same communities over and over and over who don't necessarily ride the train, but yet they have the best subway system or the best transit system, light rail system. Second is, we're also saying to cities, if you are going to go to the public and get a bond, and if you're going to go to the public and borrow money or get permission to take money, make sure you're asking for enough money. And, a lot of the cities we work with sometimes who have to go to public referendum, like in California, it's the space between the funding that they get is so far that there can't be consistency in planning and maintenance and thinking about the resource. So the idea is to begin to add in that consistency that other cities have who have consistent capital budgets and that can provide resources for that. And then third, we're trying to make cities and remind cities and connect them to the opportunity that transit investments do lead to other opportunities for revenue capture that are going to be critical in the decision making. So whether Thessaloniki and Quito, which are the examples ultimately are around what is the revenue capture that you're able to do, getting cities in the United States to be equally as smart and think about the resources they can leverage to help grow that. And we can get into some examples, but every city's, they're starting to dabble into exactly what is that challenge. And I think it depends who they are, and are they building something new, or many more of them are about how do they maintain what they currently have and how do they get the best best outcome for what they already have in place. And that's one place that's playing out. And then in other places it's starting to play out is, for the transit systems that they can't afford, how do they begin competing with the additional services that are being provided that are competitive, which are around the share ride service in particular, that are leveraging the investments that cities have made on the streetscape that is now making it competitive and moving revenue from one source of transportation to another. And how do cities deal with that and begin to anticipate that, and what do they want the outcome to be? And I think a lot of cities haven't thought through that, and we're trying to get them to be proactive as opposed to just reactive, because every time they're reactive, it just ends up kind of everyone gets half of what they want and nothing.
I think, just to Andrew's last point, I think there's also opportunities for cities to partner with these newer sort of organizations. I mean, I know that there are some who've just kind of come on the scene and just disrupted, whatever they, just the way, the status quo. But there are, I think, a lot of newer partners who are organizations who are much more interested in partnering with cities and actually talking to them and sharing the data that they get. And I think it's, obviously no one size fits all, but I think it would be interesting for cities to actually have a conversation with some of these organizations and find a way to partner that would be mutually beneficial.
Great, and we'll do one final quick question. We were not able to get to all of them, so if anybody would like to follow up with Marianne and Andrew about any lingering questions, I'm sure they would be happy to answer those. This final one, though, is on what performance measures are you proposing to determine if your investments are meeting their goals?
Well, we are interested in that question, actually. We're sort of looking at seeing if we can create a sort of list of performance indicators that would sort of cover a comprehensive gamut like our city resilience framework does. We've actually just started thinking about it, so it's pretty early days for us. But I think for us, we definitely want to make sure that whatever we put together would capture the wide benefits of that any transportation investment could deliver. And if a city had a resilience strategy, that would be great, because then we could make sure that whatever the transport investment is delivering would be tied closely to the goals of the city's resilience strategy.
Just to add to that quickly, so the city resilience framework, that circle that we showed in the beginning, was created as a precursor to the city resilience index, and we have a series of cities that are working on actually creating this resilience index, not for comparison to other cities, if you will, but really a comparison of themselves over time. And what we want is for cities to begin to understand who they are today and what investments they should be focused on that can help move the needle on the resilience challenges, and be able to partner with other cities who arguably have better scores to understand what they're doing that's different. So that's an index that's out there that's beginning to mature and leveraging data that's already in cities and taking place. And I think it's hard on the transportation side, generally speaking, on measurement, because we get a lot of folks, like CFOs in particular, who will come back to us and say, why should I invest in resilience? I'm just trying to invest in state of good repair. And they say, what's the the case use for resilience? And what we'll say is, well, here's this resilience strategy that set out 3, 4, 5, 6 goals of the city. And we're not saying that you necessarily need to spend more money. We're just saying you need to incorporate these core these concepts as design concepts as you go through the design process. Likely you won't necessarily need more money, but even if you do, you're still going to get greater benefit down the road. And then the pushback for us is, again, how do I know that? And what we typically then will push back with CFOs is saying, well, give us your decision matrix on how you're making decisions on how you invest in anything today. And one of the concerns that we see in cities as a whole is a lot of the decisions that are made on budgeting is really done on what did you spend last year, and I'll give you a little bit more or a little bit less depending on how I feel, as opposed to what's the real need of the system and how important is that system in providing the services and the things that we think government should be doing for our city. And so that's a broader conversation that I think puts transportation at a real disadvantage because of the overall complementary function of it that goes well beyond just the silo of the particular asset, and how the whole system works together to support the city as a whole and really create that livelihood and the life and the lifeblood of the city. And I think trying to help cities understand the importance is going to be something that we spend some time doing, because I think whenever they get into it, it ends up being transportation and access to opportunity is a driving force to many of the things and many of the goals that they've laid out in their resilience strategies.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Marianne and Andrew, and thank you all for your participation. Again, we will be posting today's slides on ENO's website. ENO is going to stay engaged in this larger issue, Please stay tuned for more information about our next webinar, which will be about autonomous vehicles and safety with Mark Rosekind, the former administrator of NHTSA. That will be on Wednesday, October 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I also want to encourage you all to subscribe to Transportation Weekly, an invaluable resource on all aspects of transportation policy and practice. Once again, thank you for your participation and have a great afternoon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.